He had always believed he was on the side of truth. Confident in his worldview, proud of his background, and sure of his beliefs, he walked through life feeling as though he had all the answers. Islam, to him, was just another religion, something to be challenged, debated, and defeated. He had seen debates online, read articles, and thought he knew exactly how to disprove it. So when he finally met a Muslim willing to talk, he saw it as an opportunity, not for dialogue, but for domination. He didn't come to listen, he came to win. With boldness in his voice and questions in hand, he approached the conversation like a battle. He expected defensiveness, emotional replies, or maybe even silence. But what he received shook him in a way he never expected. The Muslim didn't argue, he didn't get angry, he didn't dodge the questions. He simply smiled, listened, and answered, not from ego but from peace. His tone was calm, his words clear, and his eyes carried a strange kind of light, like someone who knew something deeper, something more grounded than anything the challenger had ever experienced. In that moment, something shifted. The challenger had come with fire in his heart, but the gentle demeanor of the Muslim felt like cool water pouring over flames. Every answer he received made him pause. It wasn't just about logic or facts, it was something beyond that. There was humility in the way the Muslim spoke, but also unshakable certainty. Not blind faith, but a kind of lived truth that didn't need loud words to be felt. For the first time in a long time, the challenger didn't feel like he was in control. He felt like he was being confronted, not by the Muslim, but by something inside himself. He left that conversation with his pride still intact on the outside, but his heart had taken a hit. At first, he tried to brush it off. It was just a debate, he told himself, but the words kept echoing in his mind. Not just the answers, but the way they were delivered. The sincerity, the patience, the peace. It all stayed with him, as if something had been planted deep inside, now quietly growing in the shadows. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The next day, he found himself replaying every moment of the conversation in his mind. Why couldn't he forget it? The days that followed were filled with silent battles. He didn't tell anyone what he was going through. On the outside, he was the same man, but inside, questions were blooming like wildfire. He started reading, not to disprove, but to understand. He began watching stories, listening to reverts, exploring the very faith he once tried to challenge. And in every step, he felt something pulling him closer, not through force, but through truth. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. Eventually he came back, not with arguments, but with tears. The same man who had once tried to prove Islam wrong now stood with a trembling heart, admitting that he had been wrong himself, not because someone defeated him in debate, but because the truth had found its way into his heart. And when he uttered the words of the Shahada, it wasn't just a declaration of faith, it was a surrender, a moment of peace, the end of one journey and the beautiful beginning of another. He walked into the conversation with certainty, almost arrogance. He had prepared his points well, rehearsed the common arguments, and believed he had enough intellectual ammunition to dismantle the Muslim's beliefs. To him, this was not just a casual conversation. It was a mission. He had long seen Islam as a religion built on myths, misunderstood principles, and blind faith. He wanted to expose it, challenge it, and walk away feeling victorious. His tone was sharp, his questions pointed, and his attitude unapologetically aggressive. But beneath all of that confidence was a heart that hadn't truly been tested. He believed he knew what truth was, but he had never genuinely searched beyond his own echo chamber. As the conversation began, he fired his first set of challenges. Why this? Why that? How can you believe in this? How is Islam any different? He expected frustration or deflection, maybe even defensiveness. But the response he received wasn't anything like he had imagined. The Muslim man, calm and composed, didn't retaliate with anger. He listened, carefully, respectfully. And then he answered not to win, but to share. Every answer came from a place of quiet confidence. There was no rush, no arrogance, just sincerity. And it was this sincerity that began to shake the challenger's foundation. He had been ready to fight, but he wasn't ready to feel. What struck him most wasn't just the content of the responses, but the presence of the one responding. The Muslim didn't need to raise his voice or win the argument. His peaceful demeanor spoke louder than words. It was as if he wasn't trying to defend a religion, but simply offering something beautiful that had already changed his own life. And that quiet strength, that depth of conviction, began to touch something deep inside the challenger. He found himself pausing, reflecting, and most of all, feeling unsettled. Not because he was being proven wrong, but because he was seeing something right, perhaps for the first time. By the end of that conversation, the challenger hadn't changed his beliefs outwardly, but something had shifted. The questions he had once asked with confidence now echoed back with doubt. He didn't walk away with a victory. He walked away with a seed planted deep in his heart, one that would begin to grow in silence, slowly breaking through the walls he had built for so long. After that initial exchange, something inside him refused to settle. He had walked into the conversation with the intention to challenge, to corner, to dismantle. But he walked away with a silence he couldn't explain. Days passed, but the memory of the Muslim's calm response, his unwavering certainty, and his genuine humility kept resurfacing. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself that it was just a moment, just a conversation. Yet his heart knew better. There was something different about that encounter. It wasn't just the answers that stayed with him, it was the feeling, a strange stillness, a kind of clarity, even peace, which had been missing from his life for a long time. As he sat alone in his room, the questions began to swirl. Not the ones he had prepared for debate, but the ones that began to rise from within. What if I was wrong? What if there's more to Islam than I thought? What if truth isn't always loud and forceful, but silent and undeniable? These were not the kinds of questions he was used to asking. For years, he had prided himself on having it all figured out, but now his own thoughts were challenging him. And the most difficult part wasn't that he didn't have answers. It was that, for the first time, he was genuinely seeking them. He found himself going back to the basics, not to win an argument this time, but to understand. He began watching videos of people who had reverted to Islam, listening to their journeys, hearing the moments that changed them. And again, he found a common theme, not just proof, but peace. These were people who had asked the same questions he once did, people who had also challenged Islam, and yet found themselves transformed not by debates, but by the truth they encountered along the way. He related to their confusion, to their hesitation, to their emotional turning points. The more he listened, the more he realized that what he was feeling wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of humility, a quiet surrender to something beyond pride, beyond ego. He wasn't losing control. He was finally discovering that there was more to life than being right. And slowly, the walls began to come down, not because someone forced them to, but because the truth was beginning to rise from within. He couldn't forget one particular moment from that conversation, the moment when the Muslim looked at him, paused, and asked a question he hadn't expected. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't philosophical, but it hit him like nothing else had. The question was simple. If what I'm saying is true, would you even want to know? It caught him off guard. He had come to challenge, to test, to expose, but he hadn't prepared for his own sincerity to be questioned. Deep inside, he realized he had never really asked himself that. Did he truly want the truth, or just to prove others wrong? That question replayed in his mind over and over again. In the shower, while driving, lying in bed at night, he had spent so much time building his identity around being a critic of Islam, of religion in general, that he had never paused to reflect on his own heart. What was he really searching for? He thought he had found peace in his logic, but now that logic was being disrupted, not by force, but by clarity, the kind of clarity that asks nothing but honesty from within. As the days passed, he started feeling something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. Not the kind that makes you weak, but the kind that exposes the truth you've been hiding from. He wasn't afraid of losing an argument anymore. He was afraid of what he might discover if he actually opened his heart. The fear wasn't in the religion, it was in the possibility that he had been wrong all along. Not just intellectually, but spiritually. That kind of realization is heavy. It humbles a person. It shakes the pride, the ego, the identity we build around being right. Eventually, he stopped trying to explain it all. He stopped pretending he was still certain. He stopped debating. And for the first time, he started listening, not just to others, but to his own soul. The words that once annoyed him now moved him. The voices that once triggered anger now brought calm. He wasn't ready to admit it to anyone, but he knew something inside him was changing. Something real. Something deeper than knowledge. It was no longer about proving or disproving. It was about finding what had been calling him all along, the quiet truth he had tried so hard to ignore. He had never felt this kind of silence before. It wasn't the absence of noise, but the presence of something deeper. A stillness that had settled into his heart since that first conversation. The more he tried to ignore it, the louder it grew. He would scroll through social media, trying to distract himself. He would talk to friends, laugh, and pretend everything was the same. But when he was alone, the weight returned. It wasn't guilt, and it wasn't fear. It was the pull of something unfamiliar, but undeniably powerful. Something was awakening inside him, and it wasn't going away. Late one night, he sat in front of his screen and opened a video titled, "Why I Became Muslim." He had seen a dozen of them before, mostly out of curiosity, sometimes to find holes in their logic. But this time, he watched differently. He wasn't analyzing, he was listening. The person in the video shared a story so raw, so familiar, it felt like a reflection of his own. Not the exact events, but the emotions, the journey from pride to doubt to realization. The speaker didn't try to convince anyone. He just told the truth of his own path, and somehow, it made the listener feel less alone. That night became a turning point. One video turned into 5 turned into 15, and before he realized it, he was diving deep into stories, explanations, reflections. The more he listened, the more he began to see that this wasn't about converting to something new. It was about returning to something natural. The idea of one God, the structure of prayer, the simplicity of submission, it all began to make sense in a way no one had explained to him before. Not because it was forced on him, but because now he was ready to receive it. For the first time, he opened the Quran, not as a critic, but as a seeker. He read slowly, carefully. And in those verses, he didn't find what he had feared. He found peace. He found clarity. He found a voice that spoke directly to his heart. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. Enough to feel that this wasn't just a book. This was guidance. And though no one else knew it yet, something sacred had already begun within him. A journey he could no longer deny. His heart beat faster with every page. What began as a search for flaws had turned into a personal exploration of something far more profound. He couldn't explain how the words felt so directed at him, how the verses seemed to speak to his questions before he could even ask them. He didn't understand all of the language, nor the deeper meanings behind every line, but the message was clear enough to touch his soul. It wasn't intellectual anymore. It had become deeply emotional. He wasn't reading a book, he was being spoken to. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control the moment. He was just present in it. Everything around him started to look different. The world that once felt chaotic now seemed to have an order. The moments he once dismissed as random began to appear as signs. The people he used to ignore now looked like reminders. Even the conversations he overheard in passing carried a weight they never had before. It was as if the world had shifted slightly, and in that shift, his perspective began to align with something he had never known he needed. This wasn't about finding a new identity. It was about peeling away the layers of confusion and finally seeing the fitra, the natural inclination towards truth, that had been buried deep inside him all along. He had built his life around confidence in his own knowledge, but that confidence had brought him only temporary satisfaction. Now, in this place of humility and quiet searching, he found a peace he couldn't explain. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, gentle, and undeniable. His ego tried to interrupt, tried to question if he was just being emotional, if this was just a phase. But deep inside, he knew this was real. Too real to ignore. He wasn't just feeling something, he was beginning to believe something. Not because someone told him to, but because his heart was opening on its own. One night, sitting alone in the dark, he whispered words that felt foreign on his tongue, but familiar in his soul. God, guide me if this is truly from you. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a debate. It was surrender. A quiet moment between a seeker and the one who had always been calling him. That night, without anyone watching, he took the first real step. Days turned into weeks, and the inner transformation he once tried to deny had now become impossible to ignore. He wasn't the same man who had set out to debate a Muslim. He wasn't filled with the same fire to challenge or to prove others wrong. Instead, he found himself yearning for silence, reflection, and moments of genuine connection with something greater than himself. His nights were no longer consumed by endless arguments online or crafting rebuttals. Instead, they were filled with questions whispered to the sky, tears shed in solitude, and a sense of peace that words could never quite capture. It wasn't a dramatic change on the outside, but on the inside, everything had shifted. There was still fear of what others might say, of how his friends would react, of the life he might leave behind. But the fear was no longer stronger than the pull towards the truth. He realized that he had spent so much of his life performing strength, performing certainty, performing faith in what he had grown up believing. But now, he no longer wanted to perform. He wanted to live in truth, even if it was unfamiliar, even if it was difficult, even if it required letting go of everything he once clung to. He remembered that Muslim he had first challenged. The way he smiled calmly, the way he didn't get defensive, the way he spoke with conviction without ever trying to dominate. At the time, it annoyed him. Now, it inspired him. That was the peace he wanted. That was the confidence he envied. Not arrogance, but clarity. He began to understand that true belief didn't need to be loud. It was quiet, consistent, and unshakable. And more than anything, it was sincere. That sincerity is what drew him in. And now, he was ready to be sincere too, with himself, with God. With this journey he had avoided for so long, the day he said the Shahada was not filled with fireworks or applause. It was just him in a room, speaking words that felt like home. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. He didn't say it for anyone else. He said it because the journey of questions had finally led him to the answer. And in that moment, everything made sense. Not because he had all the knowledge in the world, but because, finally, his heart was at peace. He began this journey with doubt, challenge, and resistance. What started as an attempt to disprove Islam ended in a discovery that changed his life forever. Along the way, he wasn't defeated by arguments or overwhelmed by pressure. He was transformed by sincerity, by humility, and by truth. He came searching for faults, but found wisdom. He came with pride, but walked away with peace. This wasn't just a shift in belief. It was a transformation of the heart, a return to the natural state he had unknowingly been seeking his entire life. The moment he took the Shahada wasn't a loss of identity. It was a return to who he truly was inside. And what touched him most deeply wasn't grand miracles or dramatic debates. It was the quiet, calm, unshakable faith of those who live by truth with dignity and grace. That was the light that reached him, the calm that softened him, and the message that led him home. To anyone watching this, wondering, questioning, or carrying doubts of your own, know that it's okay to question, but never silence the voice inside you calling you toward truth. That voice, no matter how quiet, is a mercy. Let it guide you. Because sometimes, the most beautiful discoveries come when we stop trying to win and simply start listening. Thank you so much for watching this journey, and being part of these powerful stories. If this touched your heart in any way, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need it. Your support helps more people hear these life-changing stories. Subscribe for more powerful and real journeys like this, because you never know whose heart might be next to awaken. Until next time, stay sincere, stay curious, and may peace be upon you.